I'll go ahead and call the April 15th Tax Day Public Safety Committee meeting to order. I think the Lakewood Tax Department just closed at 6, so hopefully everyone got their stuff in. So thank you for the Public Safety Committee. The first order of business is the review and approval of the minutes of the October 1st meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those pass. And then the only item on the docket this evening for the Public Safety Committee, and I want to commend the Planning Department, particularly Assistant Planning Director Dave Boss, for all the work he's put into this. It's probably been more than a year. Certainly it's been more than a year. And so it's Resolution 2023-73 for the Active Transportation Plan and accompanying Safe Streets for All plan. The last time we met, there were some final touch-ups on the Active Transportation Plan in particular, but Council wanted a little bit more time to sit down with the administration and understand kind of the ins and outs of each one of the potential changes, and then some suggestions, particularly on some of the more global parts of the plan, like what is objective base and then what's aspirational. So we wanted to make sure we accurately reflected all of that language. And then also just some treatments, potential treatments. It's posed as a potential or consider for some areas, particularly around schools, for raised crosswalks. At this time, I'll throw it over to Dave Boss to talk about it a little bit more, but just know that we appreciate the time and effort the administration has put into this. And, I think we're moving towards an approval, but Director Boss, or Assistant Director Boss, would you like to talk about this a little bit?
I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. I will. I'll just give a quick overview of the changes that were made since the last committee meeting. And I apologize, I don't have any visuals. It's all in the red line versions that you gave, and I'm just going to hit each one kind of in order. Page 54, which is the first section of the proposed basically projects and programs, talking about infrastructure projects. I just did a little bit of wordsmithing on that initial paragraph. I'm trying to avoid confusion on this base and objective recommendations. I think we got maybe a little, or I wanted to avoid people kind of getting sidetracked on that. The plan is all recommendations. It's all like our aspirational recommendations. It was just those 4 roadways that we specifically kind of got hung up on a little bit, where we're differentiating between the plan's recommendation and a longer term, to use your term, aspirational kind of vision. And so I didn't want the kind of the phraseology of base and objective to confuse people and or give the impression that the entire plan is satisficing everywhere. It's really just focusing on those 4 things in terms of thinking about an alternate vision or the aspirational vision in terms of, as opposed to what's recommended in the plan, which is bound by a lot of considerations. And so I tried to clean that up just a little bit. And for those 4, which is Lake, Clifton, Detroit, and Madison, they have a current recommendation, which is what's included in the plan. And then if you jump to page 65, it refers to the longer-term vision-based recommendation. And so it has those 2 just for those 4 roadways. If you then look at page 59, starts table 7. Those are the intersection and crossing point recommendations. This had the most number of changes. I think we went back through and based on recommendation from council and some reconsideration, we added in consider installation of raised crosswalks at a number of locations that were in a proximity primarily to school district, school zones, in areas where it made sense. Want to hold on to that language of consider so that engineering judgment, safety forces, the normal review that would go into a project consideration is still part of that. It's not directive, but it is included in the plan to consider that specific measure at the intersections that it was added into. The second modification that went into these was 2 intersections on McKinley, South and North Marginal. What was missing from that was the LPI consideration for the people that are walking north and south. Having a leading pedestrian interval is a good thing to include in terms of that, to complement the high visibility crosswalk markings as well. Just based on the traffic volume and the speeds inherent to South Marginal and North Marginal, having an LPI is an important thing there. And then page 65, I'll highlight again, just consistent language. I made it consistent between page 54 with the introduction of infrastructure projects, and then on this page with the select longer-term vision-based recommendations for Lake, Clifton, Detroit, and Madison, making sure that kind of top-level verbiage is consistent. And then addressing one of the other concerns that was highlighted at the last committee meeting, specific to what I'm calling conflict zones along the sidewalk, specific to our commercial corridors of Detroit and Madison, where we do have a number of drive entries and exits and alleyways and those types of things that are kind of integrated and often kind of blend into our streetscape, especially with the typical 2-3-story streetcar suburb buildings, brick buildings. You get those really narrow alleyways. And so I included some language under pedestrian facilities there on 65 to kind of give a little bit more guidance in consideration of high visibility markings and/or signage, consideration of those where appropriate along those corridor sidewalks where those potential conflict zones exist or could exist as a result of development. And I highlight, this is something that I think typically comes up in ABR and Planning Commission meetings, but having it kind of spelled out in this plan just makes that consistent and highlights it in here. So those are the main changes based on the comments and the discussion from the last committee meeting for the AT plan. The one change that I will highlight on the safety action plan of the Safe Streets for All is on page 44, and that's changing the start date of strategy C.2.1 to this year, to 2024, based on the comment from Councilwoman Strivey. So but that's the only change for the SS4A plan. So that's, I think in summary, those are the changes from the last committee meeting to the 2 versions that I have right now. And so that's where we're at, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assistant Director Boss. And just to elevate a little bit more of your work, which I think, sometimes we think about this as like an infrastructure plan, but it's also programmatic, and that's part of, culture and kind of creating programmatic elements. And one thing I'd like to highlight, and I'm certainly going to share it within my networks, is a great resource, the Bike Walk to School Week, and a manual that Assistant Director Boss and I think Tool Design helped put together. But it's basically like little stars in neighborhoods where families are in each school district, and kind of like a resource guide to how to set up a walk, bike, bus type information. And I'm certainly going to use it in my neighborhood, and I think Councilman Bullock also expressed some interest. But, I have a PDF version. I hope the city can link to it on the website so I could share it as well on social media, I think, because it's hard to share a PDF on social media. So I would ask for that, because it's great. It's a great resource. My wife looked at it and was really excited about it. So I think other parents will also be excited, so I appreciate that. But for the committee, certainly spent a lot of time with Assistant Director Boss on this plan, so I'll open it up to other committee members about considerations, questions, concerns. Councilman Bullock?
Glad you're calling me, except I was going to raise my hand, so thank you for doing that. Thank you, Assistant Director Boss, for all the work. Can you hear me? For all the work on this. And we had a chance to speak a little bit, and want to say on the record a couple things that we talked about. First of all, I forgot to say in the last committee meeting that I also applaud the proactive safety strategies that are in these plans. I think especially in the safety implementation plan, there's a criteria called out that rather than waiting until after a serious or fatal collision has occurred to make that we make improvements only afterwards. Now we're saying we can plan ahead to prevent and use common sense. That's been needed for years, and so I'm glad that we're beginning to move in that direction and incorporate that, because, you know, council neighborhood representatives all the time get reports of near misses, and trying to get our collective government system, whether that's county, state, or different departments in our city, to respect that data and have it count to make a change in the design and or enforcement and or speed. That's never been easy to do. So I think it's important that these plans that have been drafted are beginning to move in that direction. And then I also want to say, you know, equally as much to my colleagues and the public as to the administration, there's another goal that says establish permanent dedicated funding sources for the action plan implementation. That's a city council role to try to, if we want to be able to consistently and reliably make progress on these goals year by year, and that's probably the best way to do it, rather than wait 10 years and do a giant construction plan and then do nothing for 10 years. Instead, we should have monies on a consistent basis to chip away at these over time, learn as we go, iterate, improve. Then we need the budgetary basis for that. And so that's how we can show our values in the budget processes, and that's a city council function. So I don't have the answer today to this, but I certainly would love to lean into this partnership with the administration and figure out ways to make sure that these safety changes are not orphans in our budget, but we've got money for it every year because it matters to us. Mr. Boss, I think you did a lot of changes. You just walked through those, and the bigger ones that I had were about making sure that what's called out in the plan is an opportunity, not a limitation of quality, an opportunity. We call that floor, not a ceiling. I think we talked, and you said that that was never the intent or in the writing, although there's some confusion about that point. Could you also share, so when the plan says consider, I think you shared with me that means that the engineering and the design team will have to, they'll be required to at least work through what's listed in the consider and then have a data basis for discarding something or eliminating an option. So when we say on crossing number 35, consider raised crosswalk to improve access to Horseman Elementary School and nearby transit stops, that's going to be more than just kind of lip service when that comes around. It would be helpful to explain a little more there. Thanks.
No, I think that's the point of including the language in there for that intersection, is that it provides guidance or design guidance in terms of the improvements that you're looking to achieve in that intersection. And so I think it's assumed that you work towards implementation of those things that are mentioned, and I guess the reason why something would be stricken from that guidance is only if it's not feasible based on physical characteristics, resources, something else that goes into that project.
So the dictionary definition of the term consider, you know, as a layperson, I may not understand it. What it sounds is that the word in this context is more include these features in your plan unless those other factors intervene. And in Lakewood, we've got a bunch of complicating factors like offset intersections, narrow rights of way, et cetera, right? So there's a bunch of reasons why we would want some flexibility, but it's not a toothless recommendation is the intent here, right?
No, I think that it goes back to that aspirational vision for each of those intersections, is that you look at something and it lists out all of those things that you would want to make part of that intersection based on the high-risk network and based on a lot of considerations. But it's unrealistic in terms of time, available time, and understanding of every intersection to list and be directive and say you will do X, Y, Z, because again, you go out there and things change, resources change, and engineering guidance changes sometimes based on certain things. And so yeah, we wouldn't want to, you don't want to make the plan overly directive and make it unrealistic. You want to make it flexible.
That's wonderful, thank you. And then on page 65, just to call out the change you already referred to, but about conflict zones or where along Detroit and Madison, sidewalks, alleys, drive entries and exits, and other potential pedestrian vehicle conflict zones exist or could exist. Even though not detailed specifically in the plan, the use of high visibility markings and or signage should also be considered where appropriate. You know, that doesn't include the school district, you know, facilities the same, but I think in the spirit of this, we hopefully can be advisory to the school district in their plannings and markings and so forth as well. So I appreciate that. I think this is an enormously positive step forward in a bunch of different measures, and so I applaud the work, and I'm not on the committee, but I'll be happy to support this later tonight or whenever it's before council. And then I know, Councilman Baker, you had shared with me that there's two ways that this plan could be implemented. One is when the city, in the fullness of time, is going to do work on a given street or intersection in our normal schedule of maintenance, and the other is a different category, which I don't know if you would care to share. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm certainly not the implementer, right? But you either do it when you're paving a street, or you go in and do interventions prior to paving streets. So there's or you can wait till you do a complete replacement of the street. So there's a lot of different points at which intervention, and it's going to, you know, I would ask that the administration include council because that's important. A lot of times we approve bond anticipation notes, and you know, at the beginning of the year for, you know, when Maureen's reading them, it's, you know, 16 streets, and that's the financial approval for those, and then it goes into the system. So some of those are repaving, some of those are complete redos, and some of those are just minor refinements.
And I also recall, you know, there was some discussion that this could make the city eligible to pursue federal grant funds or even state transportation funds. So that could be, in theory, if things go optimally, a supply of monies to do some of these safety improvements before our next regular scheduled street work on a given spot on the map, ideally, right?
Yeah, I defer that question to Assistant Director Boss, but from my understanding, this plan basically unlocks the door to various federal funding and state funding sources.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is just to add a little depth to that. So that's the reason why there are two different plans. I mean, normally you work with Tool, funded by ODOT, to produce the active transportation plan. That plan was specifically designed and then drafted by Tool to make us eligible for state-level programs like Safe Routes to School, programmatic, other implementation money. We engaged Tool kind of separately, concurrently, for them to develop the Safe Streets for All plan so that it benefited from all of the work and the research and everything that went into the active transportation plan. It was just drafted and had those additional strategies listed to meet the exact requirements of the federal infrastructure bill and Safe Streets for All. And so it's different pots of money, different levels, makes us eligible, but having the two plans is critical because the safety action plan is the most important thing to have adopted and in place for that federal money, which is obviously the larger pot for some of the larger projects to consider.
Councilperson Keppel.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for your hard work on this. I know it's been a lot, it's been a long, long road, and I think, no pun intended, but I think it's going to make us all safer and better, so appreciate it. Safer road. It's been a long, safer, hopefully, road. I just wanted to follow up on the question regarding funding. Are those sort of pots, the state and the federal funds, are those one-time funds, or are those things that we can reapply to in multiple years?
I think, as I understand, Safe Routes to School is a reoccurring thing you can apply for every year. Under the federal infrastructure bill, I'm learning about it, but there are several years left, and they're trying to be as flexible as possible in the implementation, especially and using up that money, even to the point of if you apply and you are not selected, they have several iterations each year where you can reapply, learn some lessons and reapply. And so, yeah, I think there are several more bites at the apple to be had over the next couple of years for that. So.
Yes.
And so, thank you. And then with the federal infrastructure, are we concerned at all that money could not be available should there be a change in administration, federal administration, or congressional leadership?
I'd have to dig into.
So the bill that was passed by, and good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The bill that was passed by Congress was a multi-year bill. So it's been a minute since I've gone through in my research on how those bills can be changed. But it would, because it was a multi-year bill, it should take an act of Congress to change that. It's not to say that that couldn't happen, but at this point, I believe we have a 5-year period. We're in year 2 of funding for the Safer Streets for All program.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from folks on the committee or any other council people? No. Great. Well, this stat just it's on my screen and I have to talk about it. And I understand we have schools all throughout our community, but 97% of crashes happen within a half-mile school, and 84% of fatal or serious injury crashes with pedestrians happen in a half-mile school. So and I only come to this from my lens as a parent, and so that's how I think about it as a student at one time in the school. So, I just think this is so important, for our young folks to be able to have a safer network for them and everyone else, right? People of all ages and abilities. So I guess from a procedural standpoint, I think it makes sense to substitute the updated versions of the plans that are on the docket into the resolution. So I will go ahead and make a motion to substitute the updated Safe Streets for All action plan into the resolution. Is there a second for that?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And then I will go ahead and make a separate motion to incorporate the final draft of the clean version of the active transportation plan into the resolution as well. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. And then I'll lastly make a motion to refer, I guess the substitute resolution would be the way to put it, or not it'd be the same resolution just with different plans attached to it, to full council for approval. Is there any second to that motion?
Second.
Is there any discussion on that? Once again, thank you to the planning department for bearing with us. Our attention was because it was a good plan, and we just wanted to make it great. So thank you so much. So all those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. So it'll be on the docket for tonight. If there's nothing else that comes before the Public Safety Committee, I will go ahead without objection and adjourn, and then the Finance Committee starts soon, I believe. Thank you.